welcome to the podcast Of Course They Make Me Crazy. It's about crazy family stories. We all have one, right? More importantly, it's for those of you living with someone who suffers with a mental illness. You can start to feel lost in their world. Now, I get it. I grew up with a bipolar mom addicted to pain pills. Hoping the stories shared here will help you through difficult days. It's not all serious. We laugh and joke too. If you have little ones around, hop in your headphones. Adults only, please. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast Of Course They Make Me Crazy. I'm the host, April Norris. You know, losing your child is probably your absolute worst nightmare. Losing them to suicide, totally gut-wrenching. Don't wish that on anyone. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Like, how do you know if your child is serious when they threaten to hurt themselves, or how do you know they're not using it as manipulation? You might be thinking, well, April, I know they're my child, but some of you might not. And so we're going to unpack that today. You know, last week I talked with Mike Donahue from valueup.org. He goes into several schools, talks to a million teens a year. And he was saying that, you know, we need to have our children value themselves. How do we ask them to value others when they don't value themselves? We need to start instilling that more in them. He also mentioned that teen suicides are increasing in affluent homes. And so that led me to want to bring in Dr. Daniel Labelle, my guest today. Hi, Dr. Labelle.
Hi, April. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. So he might sound familiar to many of you because he was one of my very first guests on the podcast Of Course They Make Me Crazy. But I wanted to bring him in. He's a psychologist with 25 years of experience. He's authored 2 books about borderline personality disorder, and we'll name those at the end of this because he's got a 3rd book coming out. But I wanted to bring you in because I know you could really shed some light on this topic for parents. And so when you and I first started talking about this, you know, I said, how do you know if they're doing this because they're serious about what they're saying, or if they're using it as a manipulation? And you said to me, well, April, every situation is very delicate. Every situation is different. So when someone comes to you, Dr. Lobel, with a situation like this, maybe a client, how do you start to walk them through this?
Well, every situation where the issue of self-harm or thoughts or statements about hurting oneself or taking one's life has to be taken seriously. We simply cannot afford, the stakes are too high, so we simply cannot afford to have any errors in this area because it can cost us a life. So we must take every single situation seriously. However, these expressions have different functions. And so the first thing that one would do, I think, where this comes up is to evaluate these expressions or gestures in the context of whether the person is depressed, and if so, how much they're depressed. And so what we take a look at in people who express either the desire to hurt oneself or the desire to take one's own life is we look at 3 very, very important factors in the assessment of the depth or severity of depression. The first one is hopelessness. Does the person express a clear and consistent sense that the future is hopeless, that nothing can get better, that nothing, that there's no brightness, there's no joy to come, and that they're essentially convinced of that. The second is helplessness, which has to do with their sense of agency and their feeling that they cannot control the future, they cannot create hope, and they're just being passively taken along for a ride that they don't want to go on.
Absolutely.
And the third, And the third would be Anhedonia, which literally means no pleasure. And this particular indicator is least discussed of the three in the field, but I find it to be tremendously important and very, very significant. And so people who no longer get pleasure from activities that they used to get pleasure in, and so they no longer do them. People who used to enjoy being with friends, but they no longer experience pleasure from that, and they don't do it anymore. Artists who used to enjoy painting or making music, they've stopped doing it because they no longer get any pleasure from that. And that is a very significant indicator of depression severity.
Exactly. And so as a parent, sitting back and listening to this, they might be thinking, my child used to love to, play hockey, play soccer, hang with his friends, her friends. And now they're just, popping on their bed, when they get home from school, listening to, looking at their phone, maybe just diving into video games and not really socializing anymore. And I liked the example you used in one of your books where there was a young girl and she wanted to have her boyfriend over, and a little bit different and kind of isolating herself, but her parents didn't want her to have her boyfriend over because they were going away. And she said, "What, you don't trust me, you da da da," and she started to lash out, which, a lot of them do, and said, "I'm going to hurt myself if you don't let me have him over." Kind of go into whether that's something really serious, that they really need to have their antennas up, or is that just, how do they maneuver it, really, is what I'm trying to ask.
So there are really three large categories under which the suicidal or self-injurious behavior fall into. One of them would be manipulative, and that would be the case with this particular story that you bring up. Here, the sense of anhedonia is not there because she wants to be with her boyfriend, and she anticipates that that will be pleasurable. Also, the sense of hopelessness is not there because she has hope that she will be with her boyfriend. And the sense of helplessness, other than her feeling the need, understandably, to appeal to her parents as they own the home, to allow her to have the boyfriend over. And so this does not sound really so much like a depressed person who wants to end their life. This sounds like a person who wants to threaten the parents and use it manipulatively and say, "I'm going to hurt myself or kill myself if you don't give me what I want." A second category would be people that use self-injurious behavior for totally different reasons. And they use that to modulate or to cope with emotion, where they experience emotional pain or psychic pain. They don't know how to cope with it. So they create physical pain, either by cutting themselves or burning themselves or other kinds of things, sometimes banging their head against the wall, and various other kinds of things that draws their focus from the psychic pain to the physical pain, which they then perceive to be more manageable. And then the third category, which is the most serious category, would be the category of people who are helpless, hopeless, do not feel any pleasure, and do not want to live. And those are the people that we are most concerned about.
Absolutely. And how do we, because sometimes, as you probably know, Dr. Lobelle, those people are not the ones really talking about their pain, right? So
that's exactly right.
They're the ones that are quiet about it. And that is extremely scary because it comes out of maybe nowhere for somebody of a loved one looking after them. Are there any kind of signs, or is there anything that we could do better in watching out for that?
Well, those are, let's look at the signs first. The signs would be signs that would be consistent with helpless, hopeless, and anhedonia. And so helpless would be observable in terms of seeing your child or whoever, whichever person we're talking about here, essentially be listless. They spend a lot of time in bed. They don't even bother trying to do anything. They don't groom themselves. They don't eat very often. They don't even, do basic things because they don't really care whether they're alive or not. And so they become listless, passive, and non-functional. Also, the hopelessness is very clearly expressed in the absence of any kind of future plans. And so if your child has no plans for the future, and no interest in talking about plans, could be the short-term future in terms of what they might do next week, next month, or it could be even more dark, the long-term future. Why bother go to school? What's the point? Why bother get a degree? What's the point? That kind of talking and thinking where there's absolutely no vision, no sense of the future, no planning for the future. And then the anhedonia, which is the cessation, the stopping of behaviors that had previously been pleasurable to them. An avid golfer who stops golfing, a child that loves pizza, who rejects a pizza brought in, by the parents, who doesn't want to see their friends. And even, to your example, someone who even stops playing video. Mm-hmm. An avid video. Of course, video games is a whole nother,
right.
A whole nother issue.
Exactly. And then so when they're experiencing this and they're starting to see their child go down that road, what is their step? I mean, is it something where they start to talk to their child about it? How do they even approach it without getting them upset or making them closed off, or feeling judged or, because with teenagers, there's so many things that you have to tippy-toe around so you don't offend them. And how does somebody approach that?
Well, ultimately, someone who shows significant combination of helplessness, hopelessness, and anhedonia, they almost certainly are going to need some professional help. Mm-hmm. And so the way that you would talk to your child, apart from assessing that, whether or not that's present and to what extent it's present, the goal here would be to obtain some kind of professional help. And here again, I'll go back to the anhedonia being very interesting, and I'll spare you the neurochemistry and the neuroanatomy, but there's a pleasure center in the brain, and everything we do that brings us pleasure stimulates that pleasure center. And so a person experiencing anhedonia essentially has something wrong with their pleasure center. It's not working. It doesn't work anymore. And so it's most likely, not 100%, but it's most likely that there will have to be a chemical intervention and a medication to restore the functioning of the pleasure center. But how you do that with the child is, first of all, you want to make sure that the child is not normalizing what the child is feeling. And with today's music and even some of the film and other kinds of expressions where these kinds of things like feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, hurting oneself, thinking about death are presented in videos or in music as being something that everyone experiences. The first thing would be to make it clear it's not something everyone experiences, and it's not normal, and it's not healthy, and it's an illness, and it needs to be addressed.
No, I agree with you on that. It's like sometimes when I hear those, I think, well, in one hand, it's good that they're talking about it. But on the other hand, you're right. It's normalizing it, and it's kind of it's just a touchy, I think, yeah, it's good that they're talking about it. So then they know if they look up to that person, they deal with some of that too. They're not alone in dealing with it. But then again, it's normalizing it. And then what? Where do you go in life? If you're all walking around like zombies, not appreciating and loving and enjoying anything. And so in regards to that is the extreme, right? So how do you even, is it just something the parents should do? Just set the appointment up and make them go? I mean, it's just, I can just see that kind of being a battle, but I guess it's just one that you have to cross, right? In order to get them past that point.
Well, the parent should endeavor to neutralize, to the extent that the parent can, both the sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And so the way they do that, ideally, is to let the child know that although this is a very painful experience that the child is going through, and although the child doesn't know of anything to do to change what they're going through, that in fact, that other people do go through this, that we do have ways of treating it, we can treat it, and that the parent wants to partner with the child on a journey toward health and treating the health and treating the child in a curative, in a restorative way. And depression is extremely common. I believe it affects somewhat like a third of the population at some point in their lives, and you can talk to your child about that and say it's something a lot of people go through, and that one can recover, but it does not go often. Sometimes it does, but often it does not go away by itself.
Yeah, that's a hard one to get past, and I referenced at the very beginning when I was speaking with Mike Donahue from valueup.org. He goes into schools and talks to teens. It's a program that schools have them come into. And he was saying in children, a lot of them now are just not valuing themselves. And he was saying that, many just don't know how to deal with conflict anymore because many parents do try to solve their problems, not this meaning mental illness, but, problems in regards to maybe an argument with a coach, a teacher, and we try to solve everything. And it's just, they don't know how to value themselves, and they don't know how to deal with conflict, and they're feeling depressed and lost and lonely. And it's just like a storm of things that you just have to look out for. It's children, why do we all even have them? No, I'm teasing. There's just so much, you're just constantly stressing. But, I don't know where I'm going with that, Dr. Lobelle, in regards to, it's just, do you think a lot of this stems from something like that, where they are starting to lose value in themselves? He was saying there was, teens are speaking about, I'm feeling this way, but I feel guilty feeling this way because I do have so much, right? I do have a mom and dad that love me, that put a great house over my head. I have all my toys and my games, but I'm still feeling this way. Is there, is there something that starts to come out of that snowballs into the bigger picture of what we're discussing?
Well, the context is very, very, very important for a number of reasons. And I have to say, although you did not bring this up, that I think that the COVID-19 pandemic that we're experiencing now is quite significant to the point. As your previous speaker talked about the value of the self, the extension of that is the value of one's own life, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah.
And the situation that has presented itself to all of us, not just Americans, but around the globe, has given us a huge sense or added to our sense of helplessness and hopelessness, because we have a pandemic that we can't control, and it prevents us from doing a lot of the things that we did do in order to experience pleasure. And it has taken away a lot of hope, not just for children, but for adults as well. And it's probably part of what accounts for the increase in suicidality. However, I believe that was increasing even before COVID. And you bring up the issue of conflict. Conflict can be a healthy interaction between people if conflict can lead to conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my experience, quite a large percentage of the population has no idea how to do that and how to actually resolve conflicts, which requires empathy, seeing other people's perspectives, compromise, and things like that. And instead, it becomes this sort of contentious, antagonistic interaction between people that breeds resentment. And from conflict to conflict, the resentment just grows, and people don't want to be around each other anymore. And if that's the model that the teen has seen based on how their parents behave and interact, then naturally they would take away that perspective.
No, I think that's a great point. Absolutely. And you and I were, before we got on, we were talking about COVID, and I did ask if you've seen a rise in your business since it all went down, but you said really that's not the case, right? That it's just been busy prior to that too.
It's hard to determine sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not a marketing expert, so it's hard.
Yeah.
I can't track websites and people's eye movements on websites. So
right.
But very busy, yeah.
That's, I'd like to say, well, good for you, but probably, unfortunate. Is there anything else that you think that is important for us to touch on?
Well, there's the issue of how to deal with a child that's using suicidal threats or threats of self-injury, either manipulatively or perhaps out of hopelessness. And if the parent doesn't know which one it is, the parent still needs to have tools to deal with that. And so, the old adage, assume the worst, hope for the best, applies here. And so any self-mutilative, self-damaging behavior, any thoughts of a dwelling of suicide, and I say dwelling, is there a person on the planet that hasn't considered their own death at some point or another? Probably not. We all think about it. We think about it, and religion brings it up, and lots of things do. But someone who's dwelling on it or preoccupied with it, or is actually most of concern, someone who actually has a plan as to how they would do it, that's someone who's at much higher risk.
Yeah.
And the person like that should not be left alone until those feelings or behaviors resolve. And if they don't resolve, then immediate professional help should be sought.
And when you say not left alone, is that a legitimate, like somebody needs to be in the house with them all the time, or they're maybe put into some kind of, I don't know if there's a facility out there, a watch facility. I know that the Children's Hospital here, takes in suicidal kids in droves, where they're building more rooms for it. And I don't know what point they start to take those children in, if it's, the harmful point or just the talk of it, or when you say not to be left alone, what does that really mean?
Well, we have to be concerned with children adolescents who do not have fully formed brains. Their frontal lobe is not fully formed. And some of them have the beginnings of personality disorder or other disorders, or could be using substances, all of which can increase the chance of them acting impulsively. So even someone who's not acutely suicidal, in a moment of despair or rage, can, swipe at themselves with a razor blade or something, not meaning to go very deep and hit a major artery. You hit a major artery, you got about 5 minutes to get medical care, or you will pass away. And these things happen. They get a little too close to the window in an apartment building, and they can lose balance or fall. And so when I say, not leave them alone, I literally mean not leave them alone at all. You need to have eyes on them. If you can do it as a parent and you're comfortable and confident in your ability to do that and prevent a disastrous event, then okay. And if you have a partner, even better. If not, if you're affluent, you can hire people to come in your home and do that. And if you're not, then you would have to use, like you say, a hospital, an emergency room, or some other professional site. As I said before, and I have to emphasize this, we can't take chances in this particular area or people will die. Yeah,
it's scary. I hate that any parent would have to deal with that, So Dr. Lobelle, we're going to wrap this up, but before we go, you have 2 books already out. One is When Your Daughter Has BPD. The other is When Your Mother Has Borderline Personality Disorder. And if you want to learn more about that borderline personality disorder, we did do an episode with you called Borderline Personality Disorder. It's very interesting. But you also have a 3rd book coming out. So, and that is called what again?
It's Walking on Eggshells, which is a title that was originally created by Randy Kreger, and she and I and Christine Adamek will be, we're about halfway through a book. It's actually a workbook for parents whose children have BPD or might have BPD or have symptoms of BPD. And in the workbook, we do take on the issue of self-harm and suicidality. That'll be out at the end of the year on New Harbinger Press. And then I also have recently been given a column in Psychology Today, which is called My Side of the Couch. And the focus of My Side of the Couch is on personality disorders, all of the different personality disorders, although we're focusing for the moment on BPD. We will be talking about other personality disorders as well, some of them not well covered by the media. And I look forward to that very, very much.
I look forward to it too. Well, thank you so much. And I know we'll be having you on soon again. We just skimmed the surface. November 3rd, Dr. Lobelle will join me again with tactical advice you can use to help your loved one.